Now we're going to talk about the criminal case up in Montmorency County. And I've made some references to that otherwise in this presentation. But the Michigan State Police reports that I received showed 3 or 4 pages from Montmorency, primarily indicating that he was found guilty and put on probation, and did not contain any other information. And I had been told by the investigators that that file was no longer active up in Montmorency County, and I can understand that. It was not an open murder case, and sooner or later you should be able to close these files. In January of 2012, Kevin Dietz from Channel 4 in Detroit gives me additional reports from Montmorency County. They were not complete. I asked Kevin where he got the information, and he used the reporter's general observation that he didn't want to turn over sources, but I was led to believe that somebody had retained a portion of this file even though it wasn't active in the records up in Montmorency County. And there are several things in there that caused me great concern. Probably in relationship to my son's death was the report that somebody, a citizen in Montmorency County, had called the sheriff on March 19, 1977, and said that pedophile, Bush, is up here with boys. March 19th. Tim's abducted on the 16th, murdered on the 22nd. No follow-up on that call. Shocking to me. And I have been told that they finally identified the person who made that call, but she or he had died shortly before the name was located, so no verification could be made. And I also gather from reading in newspapers and police procedural novels and others that people involved in sexual activity of this nature who are put out on probation are told not to associate with children. Same thing in domestic violence cases. You're released on probation. You're not to see your spouse. I would assume that was the reason, but obviously somebody in this small community of Hillman, Michigan, was aware of Bush's proclivities in regard to pedophile activity. And there was another part of the file that I was totally unaware of. The file contained correspondence between Genesee County Prosecutor Bob Leonard's office and the Montmorency County office of the prosecutor. And it indicated a concern by Prosecutor Leonard from Flint of increased pedophile activity in several areas, and that he was in the process. And you'll recall that Gunnels and the Bush boys, the nephews, and Bush were operating out of Genesee County. And he was talking about forming a task force or an agency to investigate the increases in pedophile activity. I knew of Prosecutor Leonard because he and I graduated from high school about the same time in Flint. I remember he was a prominent athlete on the St. Michael's sports teams, and I had met him, although I'm sure he wouldn't remember me. I remembered him because of his athletic reputation. And there's a letter from an assistant prosecutor, Judith Fullerton, to the prosecutor up in Montmorency County, and says Judge Bordelais, the trial judge in Flint, would agree to a reduced plea from Bush, but would insist on jail time. We all know that didn't happen. Bush received probation. Prosecutor Fullerton is now, and has been for some time, a judge up in Flint. And I called her office and asked to speak to her on this case. She had the operator tell me she didn't remember anything about it, and I can understand that, particularly as a prosecutor. I've even had clients of mine call me after a decade or so, and I didn't remember who they were. And you couldn't keep track as an assistant prosecutor of every defendant. But this case was not your standard child sexual case. It took place during a period of time when the Oakland County child killer case was the story of the year. So I mailed copies of this information from Montmorency County to Judge Fullerton and asked her to talk to me about it. And you'll be surprised to find out that she won't return any of our calls either. I would urge the media and the law enforcement officials to have Judge Fullerton raise her right hand and see if she recalls any of this information. I also know when this information became available to Marnie Keenan, a Detroit News reporter who's been of great assistance to my family. She called Prosecutor Leonard and asked him what he remembered. He also indicated he wasn't familiar with it, but sent up some information, and she told me she sent him some information, and he didn't return any calls. And the Montmorency County records confirm what we've told you on several other occasions, that Gregory Green told the law enforcement officials in Flint that his friend Christopher Bush had killed Mark Stebbins. Every time a new page opens to us, we find more evidence of cover-up and more time when the law enforcement officials either mislead us or won't talk to us. So that's the story up in Montmorency County. And I don't know if I told you this before, but Gunnels was the victim up in Montmorency County as well as Midland County, and we got into that a little earlier in this presentation when we talked about Mr. Gunnels.